China is conducting a diplomatic masterclass right now. It is quite astounding what China has done. You saw it at the G20, really looking like the adult in the room, really looking like, Xi Jinping was just going around embarrassing Justin Trudeau, speaking with Joe Biden from a place of confidence, and also, with Indonesia and other countries at the ASEAN, ASEAN summit, the ASEAN summit. You also had the economic cooperation forum that also happened. You had, in Indonesia and in Cambodia, and this was all held in Asia. You had China really come out looking very strong. After the 20th CPC National Congress, you also had Vietnam and Cuba, the leaders of those countries, visit. And now we have China traveling abroad. In the first visit that China has made, that Xi Jinping has made, is at the unprecedented and milestone diplomatic event called the China Arab Summit. And of course, this was held in Riyadh, and it brought together the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, also Egypt, among others. And these countries have come together to say, we are not just going to be U.S. vassals anymore. This is an incredibly significant development because it comes amid all of this diplomatic strength that China is showing. Also with the Taiwan election, which did not go well. You saw these China protests, which have pittered out, and China just responding and saying, look, we can reform our COVID policy. We were doing so anyway, and these protests mean nothing. They didn't even comment on them. You can't find comments in the Chinese media anywhere because they weren't seen as that important. Believe me, China is going to comment on stuff they see as important. They didn't see the protests as important. So Taiwan election, these protests, the diplomatic achievements, both at the G20, at the ASEAN summit, the ASEAN summit, and then bringing Vietnam, bringing Cuba's leadership to China, and then this China Arab Summit. It's a huge deal because it was Saudi Arabia that organized this whole thing. Saudi Arabia said, look, we have this Saudi Vision 2030. We want to build more. We want better infrastructure. We need to pivot toward China. We need to think about, are we going to trade oil in yuan? We need to think about BRICS Plus. Saudi Arabia is saying, Joe Biden administration, the United States, they're not treating us like real partners. They're still looking at us as we are just your oil well for you to exploit because we need your weapons. That relationship is not mutually beneficial in the way that it used to be. Now, the United States has caused massive chaos in the region. Now, the United States is looked at as a failure. And now the United States is getting quite prickly with Saudi Arabia. You would think that the United States would want to keep cordial relations with Saudi Arabia, but the Biden administration has felt compelled to attack them on human rights. It's not like there isn't anything to attack, but still, the United States is the biggest human rights violator in maybe the history of the world, but certainly in the last century. There's no bigger purveyor of human rights violations and war crimes than the United States. And anything Saudi Arabia has done so largely in part because of how the United States has supported, Saudi Arabia, the petrodollar, all of that, the militarization of that government, all of it. But now Saudi Arabia, Qatar, these countries, they're fed up with the way that they're being treated. And they're saying that China is the future and they're going to move toward China. So I want to show you a quick video as we wait. So here is just a demonstration, right, of how, this is a quick report from CGTN, but you'll see the footage in Saudi Arabia of how China was received. And a comprehensive strategic partnership was signed. More than 35 different agreements, but that comprehensive strategic partnership says that there will be regular meetings among the heads of state within their respective countries, and that they're going to plan around. I think they signed somewhat something like um, something like 35 different agreements in all sorts of different areas. And so this comprehensive strategic partnership is very robust. This in and of itself is huge, but this isn't even getting to the point that China was meeting with everybody, was meeting with all of the Gulf Cooperation Council states, was asserting its defense of Palestinian rights. It's just a diplomatic masterclass, and it's making the United States and the collective West look like they're falling behind because, hint, hint, they are. So just watch this.
King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman extended a warm welcome to President Xi and expressed sincere congratulations on the success of the 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China and on Xi's re-election as General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee. President Xi says Saudi Arabia is an important member of the Arab and Islamic world. China will work with Saudi Arabia to deepen practical cooperation in all areas, increase communication and coordination in international and regional affairs, and achieve even greater progress in the China-Saudi Arabia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. The two sides agree to synergize China's Belt and Road Initiative and Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. China will increase coordination with Saudi Arabia on energy policy and expand the scale of crude oil trade. China will also deepen industrial and infrastructure cooperation with Saudi Arabia, level up trade, investment, and financial cooperation on e-commerce, clean energy, high technology, and space research, and enhance cooperation in law enforcement, counterterrorism, and de-radicalization. China has decided to designate Saudi Arabia as a tourist destination for Chinese group visitors, so as to expand mutual visits and people-to-people exchanges between the two sides. President Xi says under the current situation, to convene the first China-Arab State Summit and the first China-GCC Summit is of special significance. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman says Saudi Arabia looks forward to working with China to enhance mutual support and jointly elevate comprehensive strategic partnership to a higher level. It is believed that President Xi's visit will become an important milestone in the history of this relationship. He appreciates China's support for its Middle East Green Initiative and will work with China to strengthen cooperation on areas such as clean energy and green development.
So I don't have to play the rest of it. You get the gist. We are looking at a real realignment here, and this is a perfect time to bring in our guests because I think this is a great place to start our conversation. So without further ado, we have Brian Berletic of the New Atlas and Carl Zav, Silk and Steel podcast. Hey guys.
Hello, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you both. Carl, I appreciate the wreath behind you. Very festive.
Very festive.
Well, let's get started. I just want, I wanted to first, I think we'll have definitely a lot of time to talk about the connections between what's going on China with the US's aggression toward Russia, China. But I wanted to start with this China-Arab summit because it just concluded. I guess it's now, if we're looking at China time or your guys' time, it concluded yesterday. But I wanted to ask you all what you think, and maybe we can start with Brian. What you think about this, because Saudi Arabia organized this. Saudi Arabia said, we want to have a China-Arab summit. We want to bring together the GCC countries. We want to invite Xi Jinping here, and we want to build increasingly strong ties and make these ties very formal and basically talk up what is something that I think the United States sees as its playground, right? The United States sees the Middle East, sees this region as its playground, and Saudi Arabia and the GCC, despite all of the deep relationships they have with the United States and the rest of the West, are saying, China is more favorable in a lot of ways. So what did you think about this summit, and were you following it all? And I'll start with you, Brian.
Well, I just want to go back. Does anyone remember when General Wesley Clark talked about 7 nations in 7 years, and how he was talking about the U.S. has this window of opportunity to sweep away all of these Soviet client states and assert hegemony basically over the entire planet. And so that is what they were doing from 2000 onward. That was the whole point of the so-called war on terror. It was a pretext to launch multiple military operations all around the globe to coerce allies and adversaries alike. And it's very clear that they ran out of time. That window is closed or is very near to closing. And that's what we're watching. That's what I think this meeting between Saudi Arabia and China represents. But we have to be careful because Saudi Arabia has a long history of also approaching Russia. Many times they've done this, approach them, talk about all of these deals they want to make, all of this investment they want to do, and then they don't do any of it. So I think we have to wait and see. But I think the possibility of this leading to something much more significant, I think the possibility is quite high. Saudi Arabia is in a predicament. A lot of people see Saudi Arabia as an ally of the United States, but I think they're more like a hostage, and they're trying to weigh, the pros and cons of trying to wrestle away from the U.S. and potentially being shot in the back, or remaining a hostage and a human shield, essentially, to bear the brunt of the consequences of U.S. foreign policy before the U.S. itself has to bear the brunt.
Yeah, Carl, anything you want to add? Oh, you're muted.
I muted myself. No, I think Brian covered it pretty well, because we have to keep in mind it's a real possibility that Saudi is using this approachment with China as a bargaining chip with the United States. Because right now, as we all know, U.S. and Saudi relationship has been rocky in the past few years. And Saudi might do this as a way of saying, look, we got other options. We can turn into China. We can potentially move off from the petrodollar train, because they have been floating out the idea of talking about trading with China in RMB for Saudi oil, which would be a big sea changer, because as we know, the U.S. hegemony over the world is based on military, technology, and financial. And a huge part of that financial dominance is through the petrodollar, because in the 70s, the United States would work out a deal with Saudi to price the crude oil in US dollars. Now, if you look at today's trade, for example, between Saudi Arabia and China, it totally dwarfs whatever Saudi has going on with the United States. I was looking at the trade numbers. The amount of the oil that China imports from Saudi Arabia in one quarter is more than what U.S. imports from Saudi in a whole year. So I think the number I saw floating around was $50 billion. $50 billion worth of oil export from Saudi Arabia to China. Saudi Arabia is a top one supplier oil to China. The second one is Russia. So if Saudi does move to really to trade to accept RMB as payment for the Saudi oil, that will be a huge shock to the world financial market. It will be a huge shock to the U.S. petrodollar hegemony. I'm still a little bit skeptical, just like Brian. I adopt a wait to see attitude. I'll believe it when I see it. But right now, incrementally, we do start to see the crumbling of U.S. hegemony around the edges. Like even if they just start a small amount of trading between Saudi Arabia and China in RMB, that people can see the writings on the wall, because that's just the beginning of that. That's just the beginning, right? I mean, so it's to put U.S. on notice. Like, look, you can't ignore us as Saudis and take us for granted because we have options. We can turn to China. So that is a real possibility. We have to see. But on the other hand, the Chinese foreign policy has always been, we'll make friends with anybody, right? I mean, if you look at the Middle East situation, China actually managed to have a good relationship with both Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is very rare, right? And so the Chinese position is, we are just here to do business. We don't care. We're not going to interfere your domestic affairs. That's your business. We understand you are from different culture, different background. That's not, how you govern yourself. That's none of our business. We are just here to do business in a mutual beneficial manners. So it's quite a different approach from U.S., which has won China a lot of friends around the world in the past, I say 20, 30 years. I think recently there's a poll, a global opinion poll. A lot of people in U.S. like to show that the public opinion of China has worsened considerably in the Western developed countries. Of course, we know that's due to the heightened propaganda machine based from Washington. But if you actually look at the opinions of China in the global South, in other words, in much of the rest of the world, outside the so-called international community made up of U.S. and its cronies, China's people's perception of China is a lot more positive than their perception of the United States. So the tide is shifting. We live in interesting times, so we'll just have to wait and see.